Hello, my friends. This is the Grimflayer. Hope you're all doing very, very well this afternoon. Or whenever you're watching this. Maybe it's the middle of the night. Whatever. I hope you're having a good day. Now, we are playing some more Golgari, and we are on the play with what would be a pretty spectacular hand in a blind game 1 if it wasn't for the fact that it doesn't make black mana. Now, you can argue that maybe this is a keep because you have an okay turn 1 play of Resolving Treetop Village, which is never bad to be able to do that right away. And then turn 2 we can play a threat, and if we draw any land in the deck, basically, we can, even a Field of Ruin lets us potentially field something, then Inquisition on turn 3. I don't know. I think that's a little too risky in a blind game 1. We can probably do better with a 6. I think this is better. We're going to want to see something decent with the Scry, of course, but this is a much more functional hand. We still get to resolve a creature land turn 1. Certainly has a lot less gas than the previous hand, but I'm pretty happy to keep this 6. Our opponent will keep 7. We see a Tireless Tracker on top. Alright, that's looking pretty good. So, Quagmire and Pass is just fine. Black Cleave Cliffs. Faithless Looting. Stinkweed Imp and Bloodghast. Oh no! We are against Dredge. Dredge is a tough one in my experience for this deck. We have a reasonable amount of cards to bring in post side, and we have a reasonable amount of cards that are actually quite good against them game 1. We have one of them in hand, and this card is much better against Dredge specifically on the play than on the draw. So I am happy to have mulliganed away a hand with an ooze and still found a 6 with an ooze. That is basically step 1 in terms of having a chance against Dredge game 1. This is probably the best card we can see most of the time. Now, the fact that they had turn 1 looting into Stinkweed Imp and Bloodghast means that they already get to go off before our ooze is doing anything. So they're, of course, going to Dredge the Imp. They're going to get a free Narcomoeba. They found an Amalgam, too. They're going to loot again, putting another Imp and another Bloodghast in. They make a land drop. Yeah. Getting Bloodghasts back. They get to play a Shriekhorn, too. They are just going off. They get the Amalgam back a few different ways, and then it's to us. Now, they're, like I said, Scavenging Ooze on the play, pretty much as good as we can do against them game 1, and just look at the state of their board. Just look at the state of their board. They've got a ton of value still sitting in the graveyard. They've got more ways to mill on board. They still have 4 cards in hand, too. That's the terrifying thing. And often a turn 1 Inquisition of Kozilek, even though discard in general against them is quite bad sometimes. Turn 1 Inquisition taking away Cathartic Reunion can still be one of our better plays. That wouldn't even have done anything against them. They might still have the Cathartic Reunion in hand, by the way, but taking away the looting is a lot more mediocre because they get it later. So they just went off, and there is not much that we can do about it. So what do we do here? Well, I think we, step 1, definitely have to take away that Stinkweed Imp. We could also take away both Faithless Lootings here, which is going to deprive them of any value in the graveyard right now. That is a play, but I don't think it's the right play. I think what we have to do here is just be patient and just say, hey, we're going to really lean on the Skoos and hopes that it will get us there. A big reason for that is because they can do this. They can end step a Shriekhorn, and they're going to want to end step it because it's a tap ability. And so they can end step the Shriekhorn, then they can untap and upkeep the Shriekhorn, giving themselves 4 more chances at finding a Dredge card. So they find Conflagrate and Prized Amalgam. I just eat the Conflagrate right away. I could wait as well, but I just know I'm not going to want to let them, move to their main phase with it. So I just do it right away. Conflagrate on our ooze is just game over. So even if they had found 2 Dredgers here, I think I would have had to take the Conflagrate away. That said, our line is being rewarded. We get to take away the other Stinkweed Imp. Now, don't get me wrong, those Shriekhorn activations were still pretty insane. They found 4 fantastic cards off of them. So we got to prevent the Dredge for this turn for the moment, but they still get to just play a land, get a Bloodghast back, get a delayed trigger on the Amalgam. Their deck is just doing it. And of course, they do get to flash back the Faithless Looting, as I pointed out. Here they don't get any more direct value, but they do get to just loot away 2 unwanted lands. That's quite good. Now, you will note that our ooze is a nice, healthy 4/4. That was just enough to wall off all of these attacks. So all they can do is get in with a Narcomoeba. So, again, the fact that we were really patient with our ooze paid off there. And again, if we were on the draw with this ooze, way too slow against what they're doing, they're just going to run us over. But we might just be able to lean on this ooze for a little while longer to get back in the game. Now, we drew Maelstrom Pulse. That's quite good. 3 Bloodghast is not a bad target for Pulse. 2 Amalgams is perhaps an even better one. What do we do? Do we fire up the Pulse? I don't think we can quite yet. We're just going to eat away the last piece of value that's currently in their graveyard. Technically, these lands represent value with Life from the Loam, but, you know what I mean. And I think we just have to keep being patient with the ooze. We have to continue to be able to fight over this Shriekhorn, and here we will. We're going to take away that looting. We also have, the ability to hold up one more activation against anything they might do out of the hand. So let's see what they've got. They're just going to crack in with the Narcomoeba. Once again, the attack is not quite profitable enough yet. And that's partially because we're at such a high life total. They can't really afford to send them all in and lose 1 to a block. It's going to get gobbled up by the ooze. We're going to gain a life. It's just they need to wait for a slightly better window. They need to go maybe a little bit wider. Life from the Loam, sure, there it is. I mean, that's a good one. So we could end step gobble up the Life from the Loam. Here's what I did instead. I'm going to end step Fatal Push Bloodghast. This is going to be slightly more mana efficient. It's going to let us eat a thing, gain a life, get a little bit bigger, a little bit safer against Conflagrate, and we're still planning to eat the Life from the Loam this turn. 5 mana, as good as it is to hit all 5 lands on curve, it's still not quite enough to safely Maelstrom Pulse and then gobble up a couple things and go totally shields down. We are on the slow roll plan, so knowing that, we're going to eat the Life from the Loam, and we're going to take a turn off of holding up and threatening and bluffing interaction to play the Tireless Tracker. This is a little safer than pulsing because their attacks are still not that profitable, and if they do become profitable at the drop of a hat, we at least have something that can trade with the Tireless Tracker. We're not that upset to do that here because it's basically Scooz or Bust. That said, we can't just have that holding pattern go on for too long. So playing the tracker is nice. It lets us get another body down, lets us make a clue. We're still holding up an ooze activation. And we might have kind of run them out of Dredge resources, at least for now. Again, they just get to tap us for 1. Not that bad. They're making land drops. And yep, here's a stage of the game where they're hard casting a Stinkweed Imp. This is actually very good for them often in this matchup because it is effectively something with Death Touch. It's going to wall off our fatties, and if we do ever decide to try to attack through it, well, that's very bad. It either trades with something and goes in the graveyard, or we remove it and it goes in the graveyard, so we have free attacks. The problem either way is, of course, it gets to Dredge on the following turn, so definitely a nice plan B for them to just hardcast the imps. Abrupt Decay is a pretty good draw because it's going to mean that we can start potentially removing things like that. We thought about it, we thought about not doing it, and yep, it's time. Time to remove the imp, get it off the field, eat it with the ooze, and just go back to our holding pattern. You know, we're happy to, you know, Tarmogoyf is good in the matchup, but we're happy here to hold up either Clue or the Ooze. This lets us slow roll around the Ooze without totally losing value. That's why it was nice to resolve Tracker that turn. They found a Cathartic Reunion, which is usually quite good for them, but they've already put a lot of stuff into the yard. Look at all this value we've already eaten away, so they don't have anything else left in hand, at least nothing they care to pitch right now. They're just looting away lands and naturally drawing twice. Kind of a strange thing to see out of a Dredge deck, but our Ooze has done enough work that is the play that makes sense for them, so sure, fair enough. They get us for one. They play another land. They hardcast another Narcomoeba. Not the end of the world, that is for sure. End step will crack a Clue. Sure, finding more lands with Tracker seems okay. Let's make our Clue right away. Let's crack a Clue right away, see what's up. Fatal Push, okay. Fatal Push is the type of card that looks very bad on paper against Dredge because they go so wide and they're so recursive, but with a Scooze down, or with other ways to get things out of the graveyard, it's actually quite good. This frees us up to turn our creature sideways, and I will tell you why. So if they take blocks here, that's actually pretty bad. We can go back to eating things with the Ooze. We have Fatal Push to hold up, Tarmogoyf to deploy, or even Pulse to main phase in our second main phase. We have a lot of ways. We can also deploy the Tassiger potentially, by the way. A lot of ways to do things in our second main phase if these attacks go worse than expected. If they just let them through, well, they are on one more hit, potentially from either one of these creatures after another turn or two, is going to present lethal. So getting them down to that life total is actually quite relevant. And so what we decide to do here is just basically lean on the Scooze again. Say, okay, I'm going to kill a thing, I'm going to take away that creature, and I'm at 19 life. Let's see if you can put me under any real pressure, or if you are just going to try to race me. So what they're doing here is getting across for 8 damage, putting me within range of kind of an Alpha Strike, where they go really wide and swing with everything. The problem here is they're leaning on a couple of Narcomoebas to block. Sure. And of course I have Maelstrom Pulse in hand, which is a nice out to them. They're going to hardcast a Creeping Chill. Alright, that's a nice little swing. Yeah, so normally, look at the wording on Creeping Chill, just so everyone knows. When it is put into your graveyard from your library, you may exile it. If you do, Creeping Chill deals 3 damage. So that gives you a window to kind of fight over this card with graveyard interaction. Doesn't work if they just cast it from their hand. So we're punished a little bit by our sequencing. We kind of wasted 2 mana, but you know, unless they've got something really crazy, I don't think Dredge has anything game 1 that can stop us here. So we're just going to Maelstrom Pulse away the 2 blockers, attack for 12, and I think that should do it. Yeah, pretty simple. So kind of surprised to steal a game 1 from a Dredge progression that went off so strongly, but I think our turn 2 Scooze was obviously, again, and being on the play, the only reason we had a chance there, but just playing the really slow and cautious and patient game, leaning on the Scavenging Ooze, content to say, okay, we're just going to take away the Dredge effects first, and we're going to play around with Shriekhorn, finding more of them, and yes, you can have your Faithless Lootings, you can have your Bloodghasts. We're not going to go shields down to compete over those, because we can beat them if we can stop them from completely nut drawing us, and if we can keep our Scooze around long enough to get huge. It's going to keep our life total healthy, and look, we needed a lot of help from our deck. We drew enough lands. We drew enough green sources specifically. We drew the right forms of removal at the right times to keep their board down and indeed to crash in for lethal at the end there. And Tireless Tracker came at a really nice time where we could go somewhat shields down with Ooze in order to develop our board and have a clue, make more land drops, stay consistent, all that good stuff. So don't get me wrong, we needed the help from our deck to win against Dredge Game 1 at all, much less on a Mulda 6, but we did, we got there, and I think the sequencing with Scavenging Ooze in particular was really key. So, Dredge is a classic example of a matchup that really wants to win Game 1 because decks bring in all kinds of hate for it Game 2. So let's check out the sideboard and see what we're going to do to try to keep from getting overrun by Dredge in Games 2 and 3. Alright, my friends, what do we do against Dredge? What do we do against this very resilient graveyard deck that blocks up our board, presents pseudo-death touch creatures, or just an endless stream of recursive chump blockers to slow down our relatively few threats, stop them from getting in, and can just outrace us? They've got reach now with Creeping Chill, and Conflagrate has always been a problem. What do we do? What do we do? Well, the first and most obvious thing to say is that anything that attacks the grave is good enough to bring in against Dredge. So, Nihil Spellbomb, for sure an amazing, amazing card. This is going to be very good against the types of progressions where they load up their graveyard with a bunch of nice looting or discard effects in preparation to go off the following turn, using the Dredge mechanic on their draw step. Nihil Spellbomb can very cleanly answer that, potentially netting us a card to replace it along the way. Also very nice in terms of making our removal better. So we have some cards like Fatal Push in Abrupt Decay and Assassin's Trophy. You know, killing their thing isn't very good if it just comes back next turn, but if we have a window to get it out of the yard using a card like Nihil Spellbomb, that is potentially very good. So this is great here. Surgical Extraction, obviously all the same things apply. This directly removes things from the graveyard before they've gotten them into play, and or allows us to make our removal a little bit better than it would otherwise be by pushing something and then extracting them all from the deck. Now, you don't just want to necessarily do that willy-nilly. This card should still be used for high priority targets whenever possible, but that will often be a line that makes sense. The other piece of graveyard hate we have in our sideboard is Kalitas. This guy is going to he basically acts as a rest in peace against their creatures specifically. It's not going to act as a rest in peace against Creeping Chill or against Conflagrate or against Faithless Looting, so that's all true. So, like I said, it's a rest in peace of sorts, but only against the creatures. That said, it's still a lifelinker, it's a great blocker, it's going to create our own chumps to tangle with their wide board, and it is going to, of course, be a mana sink that can eventually take over the game, just getting too big to be profitably blocked out of Conflagrate range and just gaining us too much life for them to realistically beat. As always, a little bit clunky. It comes down on turn 4, and then you need to untap with it to really get a ton of value, but 100% still comes in here. There's no question about that. We just have too many cards that are bad, and his upside is just too good. So let's take a look at what else comes in. So first of all, any form of removal, in my opinion, is going to be a maybe. And of course, we're going to get into more nuanced discussion about which of these are better and worse, the pros and cons of each. But removal in general is just kind of maybe against Dredge, because like against almost any Dredge progression, you will have to kill some of their things to win the game. Whether it be simply to stay alive, whether it be, 2-for-1ing them with cards like Pulse and Golgari Charm, even if the 2-for-1's only a temporary one because their threats can be recursive, whether it is taking away their Stinkweed Imp so your creatures can safely attack, you will have to cast removal spells against Dredge to win, unless they are just not going off at all. So removal is a necessary evil in this deck, and it's a necessary evil instead of just good, of course, because they get so much free value out of their plays. They have so many recursive threats. Spending cards to remove a thing that's just going to come back next turn is obviously not the ideal use case of these cards. So for now, every form of removal, I think, can just come into the maybe board. Wraths, Brutality, and the more catch-all stuff, it's all maybe for now. Let's see if we want anything else. I'm going to say definite no to Duress. Discard in general is pretty bad. Again, with some nuance, which I'll explain when we look at what comes out of our maybe board. Definite no to Fulminator. Definite no to Nissa. She's just too slow. And they're not really removing our permanents so much. So that grindy aspect, and, they're realistically will have a chump blocker for her animate. She's just not the matchup for her. Obstinate Baloth, I'll again say no to, just a little too slow. The life gain is fine. The body actually lines up pretty well against a lot of Dredge stuff, but as far as I know, it is not common for Dredge to be bringing in, or indeed even playing that many copies of stuff like Thoughtseize against us, and certainly don't think stuff like Liliana of the Veil is very good against, in the Dredge deck. Not floating around there 75 to my knowledge. Choke is not live here. Yeah, they maybe play a blue-black land or something so they can hardcast their Narcomoebas and Prized Amalgams. Not the axis we wish to fight on, that is for certain. So we have some removal to consider, but for now, we have 4 definites. Now, what don't we like? Well, Liliana of the Veil is pretty bad. I'm a little bit more conservative, I think, than the average BGX player with regard to leaving Liliana's in. A lot of the matchups where she is below her best, and a lot of people will take out all copies of Lily, I still like to leave in 1 more often than not. Dredge is not the matchup for that. Her +1 can be completely disastrous, giving the Dredge player a ton of fuel. Her -2 is underwhelming at best. She's clunky, she's slow, you can't protect her even if you wanted to. More realistically, Dredge will just ignore her and attack your life total, because she's just that bad. So, I love the Liliana. I think she's still so good in Modern. She's still the premier Planeswalker of the format, if you ask me. Again, even I will take out all 3 here. I also then want to move to the targeted discard spells, because these are worth really considering carefully. Now, just like the Liliana +1, they can be completely disastrous. You will note, if you read Inquisition of Kozilek, you will not see the word may anywhere in that text box. Ditto with Thoughtseize. You do not have the option as the controller of these spells to look at their hand and say, whoa, abort mission, I don't want to take any of these, they're all very bad for me when they go in the graveyard. You don't have that choice. You can't back out once you cast the card. You've got to take something, and that can end very badly for you, because Dredge will sometimes keep hands, especially if they've taken a mulligan or two, where they have a lot of gas in hand, but they have no Faithless Looting or Cathartic Reunion or any other way to get them into the graveyard. So you can do their work for them that way. So do we just take out all 6 discard spells? Well, honestly, I don't think that's bad at all. I think that's pretty realistic, and I think that's pretty reasonable. Here's the problem, though. Dredge is playing, last I knew, 4 copies of Cathartic Reunion. This is arguably the most important card for them to resolve. A turn 2 Cathartic Reunion is just more powerful than Faithless Looting and Shriekhorn. And that is one of the only cards that we can answer cleanly, even on the draw, with a discard spell. That said, if we're on the play, taking away the Faithless Looting, it's not a permanent solution because they can flash it back, but it can really slow them down. Taking away the Shriekhorn is also really good. So, as bad as discard can be, I feel we almost have to leave some number of them in. There's also the consideration of them bringing in interactive cards, some removal or whatever post side against us. We can take that away too. So I think that Thoughtseize is clearly just worse than Inquisition here. I can't think of anything I want to take that Inquisition doesn't hit. So 3 Thoughtseize out, pretty free in my opinion. You could even say that maybe we go down to 2 discard spells. 2 to 3. 2 to 3 is Inquisition left in, is what we want, in my opinion. I like Collective Brutality more, because it's going to still be able to hit the Cathartic Reunion and the Faithless Looting, although it's too slow to hit the turn 1 looting. And of course, killing something, draining life, these are more relevant modes. So as far as discard goes, I like that better. So is there anything else we don't like? Assassin's Trophy is very, very mediocre here. I think, so if we're looking at these other forms of removal, I honestly rate them all more highly than Trophy. The 2-for-1 potential of all these cards is higher. And of course it doesn't ramp them. So I think we can move away from Trophy to the tune of 2 and pretty freely bring in all 3 of these cards. So that would leave us looking at the Wraths, the Wrath effects. Now, I think Languish is a pretty free inclusion here. Everything they play is going to die to it. A lot of the stuff we play won't die to it, especially because Tarmogoyf can get huge in this matchup. Tarmogoyf specifically will almost never die to a Languish against Dredge, unless you've got their graveyard emptied, in which case you don't need to cast your Languish. You're probably just winning already. So I think this is a fine 60. I think you can also play around with these 2 cards. You know, maybe the 3rd Brutality is better than the 3rd Inquisition. That's fine. And maybe we just, you know, want to move away even from a 3rd Trophy. You know, I think this is a matchup where this card's pretty bad. It's almost tempting to say let's cut a Fatal Push, but really, where is Push worse than Trophy? Just if you don't have Revolt and you want to kill an Amalgam, I guess. But, man, I don't know. So the 61st card coming out could be anything. You could just not bring in this Brutality. You could cut a Trophy. You could cut a Fatal Push. Or you could just not play the Damnation as well. But I think you want the Damnation. Slow though it is, symmetrical though it is, recursive though their threats are. You know, we just have a lot of cards that aren't that thrilling. Liliana the Last Hope is not very good, honestly. Not the greatest here. There are progressions where she's fine. Tireless Tracker is pretty slow. You could cut a Tracker, that would be fine too. Like, there's just a lot of really medium stuff. We are leaning on a few key cards. We're leaning on Scavenging Ooze, and we're leaning on our other forms of Grave Hate from the side. Everything else is going to be not good enough unless we have one of those things getting us really good value, making our other forms of interaction up to an acceptable power level. Beyond that, we're leaning on Tarmogoyf and Tasigur as really efficient, big-bodied threats that are going to be able to come down early in these matchups and be huge, and wall off their attacks really well while providing a nice clock. So, let's just, for the sake of having a 60 to submit and say this is what we want to do, let's look at the converted mana cost and take a gander. I think this is pretty fine. I think this is a 60 I would stand by and say, yes, this is a pretty reasonable look for the deck post side. That said, a lot of decisions that could be quibbled over those last few slots specifically. So I would love to hear your feedback if you are an experienced veteran of this matchup and you have a different approach. Please let me know. I certainly have room to grow as far as this matchup is concerned. So leave your feedback in the comments below if you're so inclined. But let's head over to Game 2. See what happens. Alright, my friends. Game 2 against Dredge, and we've got to keep this hand, in my opinion. We've got to keep it. We only left in 2 or 3 copies of Inquisition. It can be very, very good, specifically on the draw, turn 1. Taking away the Cathartic Reunion is the reason why this card is still in here. Even turn 2 is too late to see this card on the draw, because they will already have played their Shriekhorn or their Faithless Looting or their Cathartic Reunion. So Inquisition turn 1, a little sketchy, still, but if we're going to see it, it's where we want to see it. Of course, we have to keep this hand purely on the strength of Scavenging Ooze. This can clear the way for a removal spell, too, if they've got, you know, some form of spot removal for cards like Ooze. So, this hand has a whole lot of nothing besides these two cards. Treetop Village, of course, has to be noted as a respectable threat, but certainly not the type of matchup where it can get us there on its own. So this is a keep. This is a definite keep in my opinion, but it's one that fully recognizes the limitations of the hand. Very unusual play for our opponent, going turn 1, Conflagrate for 0 just to get that card in the yard. Well, I'm pretty happy to see that. Pretty happy to see that. So, Blooming Marsh into Inquisition. Little bit risky here, of course, because they didn't have any way to get anything more in the yards, and we could have, like, if they didn't have this Nature's Claim, we'd just be discarding a Stinkweed Imp. So, this was actually kind of a questionable decision, actually, for me to Inquisition here, but I wanted to clear the way for my Ooze. I see that the coast is clear to play it, and I also get to take away the Nature's Claim. Now, they do have double Stinkweed Imp in hand, so I definitely cannot fire off another discard spell for the rest of the game, basically, unless I really need to, or unless something major changes. Blood Crypt. Conflagrate me for 2. Yeah. So, there's the major change. They can just picture their whole hand just about to Conflagrate, and that's what they did. They've got double Imp in the yard now, and that's just pretty bad for me. So, even a suboptimal start from them, you know, we get to play our Ooze, but they get to dredge a Stinkweed Imp, and they've just got another Conflagrate, they've got an Amalgam, they've got a Life from the Loam. Yeah, okay. Just being on the draw, Scavenging Ooze is just a little too slow, and they're just going to blow it up right away with the Conflagrate, ditch their other Imp, and their mind, they just go completely empty-handed. Well, I think that's the play for them to make. So I believe for this game, the 60 I just showed you with the sideboard had only 1 trophy in it. I believe we left in 2 here, and we're very punished, drawing them both. They're both very underwhelming right now. We have found a Tarmogoyf since our opening hand, but otherwise we are just at their mercy. They're going to dredge. Narcomoeba comes back. They cast a Life from the Loam. Bloodghast, Prized Amalgam. Okay. Well, Tireless Tracker is actually kind of an okay draw here. Of course, we want to see just our direct forms of Grave Hate. Kalidas would be potentially able to stabilize us here. Spellbomb is always welcome. Scooz is always welcome. But Tracker is okay. They're gonna get the Creeping Chill. Sure. Flashback of Faithless Looting. More value. Bloodghast. Couple more Dredgers. Yep. I don't think we're going to take a block here because we just, regardless of whether Tracker lives or not, we pretty much need to draw something really good off the top here. And then if we do, we can potentially stabilize and take over the game with Tireless Tracker's help. We draw a Maelstrom Pulse. Here's an example of a card that can be very good if we have an Ooze around or other forms of Grave Hate going. As it is, it doesn't really do anything for us. We're not going to win the game by pulsing away something here. They just have so much dredge value in the graveyard, we are not realistically keeping them off of anything. It's just basically a fog of sorts at this point. So out of desperation, we have to crack the clue. We find another Tracker. Definitely not what we're in the market for. Yeah, we just have to turn him sideways here. We have to turn him sideways. We're not going to win playing defense. And we're not going to win pulsing and trophying anything. So we just play this other Tracker, knowing we've got a chump block with it, hoping to draw something next turn that really makes. But at this point, what are we gonna do? They dredge some more things into the yard, including a Life from the Loam. That's the only really relevant one, and they get a Narcomoeba back as well. So they turn them all sideways. We'll take the chump block here. They're gonna hard cast Stinky, sure. Fatal Push, yeah, just not gonna do it. Even if we had left back the Tarmogoyf to block, like, I don't think that gets us anywhere. Truly don't. So we're going to pass holding up Push and Trophy here, holding up a Clue activation, and holding up the Treetop Village. Now, this is actually kind of crucial, so let's take a moment to pause here. I don't want to blow by this line that I took without giving it its fair due. So, they actually are incentivized to just turn everything sideways here, right? We're at 2. Even if just their 2/1/1s get through, or even if a Bloodghast gets through, we are dead on board. I think if they do turn everything sideways, obviously we're dead to a million different things here, but we could potentially end up still in the game. So they're going to get a Bloodghast back. Yes, they're going to get their Amalgams back, but that doesn't happen quite yet. So here they go, turning them sideways, right? Or will they? So they're a little cautious. They're going to leave back a Narcomoeba. All right. So this is our most mana-efficient play. We fire up the Treetop Village, we're going to assign blocks, and then, before damage, we get to make green mana with the Treetop, which gives us just enough mana to Fatal Push the Bloodghast so we stay alive, and Assassin's Trophy their Stinkweed Imp. So, next turn, potentially, if our draws help us out, we can get in. Because remember, these prized amalgams, when they return from the graveyard, will enter tapped, and the Bloodghast they get back cannot block. So what else do they have? They're going to hardcast another Stinkweed Imp. Okay, yep, that is a problem. But, you know, as far as taking the blocks was concerned, this was the best we could do. Ugh. Another tracker off the top. That is just brutal. So, we have the removal for their 2 blockers in hand, but we only have 8 power. We can crack a Clue, getting to 9 power. We can get in with the Treetop. That makes 12. So even if we had clear attacks, we are 1 shy. So there's not much we can do. Because we don't have the Fatal Push anymore, we don't have the mana efficiency to do the same thing we did last turn. Fire up the Treetop, assign 3 blocks, remove 2 things. We can't do it anymore, so we're dead on board. We have to just crack a Clue. And it's Tassiger. You know, we'll play him. We're going to make them play it out. But we are just dead. So, pass. They get their stuff back, and then we decide, we can just scoop and go to game 3. So, we made kind of a valiant little stand with our creatures. One that was kind of surprisingly effective, but they just shut us down early with that Conflagrate on our Scavenging Ooze, and then we just drew too much removal and no more grave interaction. That's really what was lacking. So, Tarmogoyf goes some way to stabilizing the board and presenting a clock, depending on the kind of flow of the match. But yeah, just didn't have enough. So, game 3 it is. Let's see if we can do better on the play. Okay, my friends, game 3 against Dredge, we're on the play, and we have a dilemma right out of the gates. So, my rule of thumb with this deck is that I always mulligan 1-landers with one exception, and the one exception is if I am against a highly degenerate or uninteractive or hard to stop or hyperlinear deck that is very vulnerable to specific hate, and I have that hate in hand, and it's castable. Those exceptions, of which there are many, we tick all the boxes here. Dredge is a very linear, and some would say degenerate deck, that folds pretty hard to hate and is very hard to stop without that hate. We have the hate in hand. It's castable. So this one lander is not therefore an automatic mulligan, but we still have to analyze the whole hand in, hey, you know, I think I have to keep this. Like I said in game 2, if Inquisition's going to be good, it's obviously going to be good in exactly turns 1 or 2. Fatal Pushes, they're fine. They're actually a pretty decent card in the matchup if we have the Grave Hate, which we do, to accompany them. And we have 4 castable spells off one land, which is a rarity in this deck. And the other 2 cards are great here. Of course, Scavenging Ooze is a card we really, really want to see. In Golgari Charm, hey, we brought it in. It's just fine. It can get a nice 2-for-1, maybe temporary, maybe not, with the other stuff around. So I think we have to keep this hand, even though one-landers are sketchy. Opponent will mulligan to 6. Opponent will mulligan to 5. Opponent will keep. Now, this was my thought process. Let me know what you would do. I really want to know what you would do here. When I kept the 7, I planned to Inquisition them on turn 1, and then to hopefully draw lands and go from there. They have mulliganed to 5 cards, and that makes me a lot more frightened to cast the Inquisition, because if they kept 7, it would be reasonably likely to assume that they have some combination of stuff they want in the graveyard, ways to get it in the graveyard, lands, and potentially sideboard interaction. The fact that they mulligan to 5 means they could have literally anything. They could have, you know, triple Stinkweed Imp and 2 lands in hand, and they're just doing complete and literal nothing until I Inquisition them, and then they just get to go off on their turn 1 draw step. That's so bad. So, what do I do here? Should I still cast the Inquisition, or do I play it safe and play the Nile Spellbomb? How bad could playing Nile Spellbomb be? That was my reasoning. But maybe I should have Inquisitioned. I still think this line might be statistically correct. But as you're about to see, I get punished pretty hard for choosing not to Inquisition. So, off their mull to 5, this is what happens to me. They go land, Nature's Claim. Pretty bad. I was a little bit blown away and tilted by this, so I just kind of reflexively spellbombed them. I don't even know if that's correct. You know, getting a land out of their graveyard is relevant for Life from the Loam. Then again, maybe I should have just gained the 4 life off of that, because that's relevant too. But hey, life is good, right? Life is okay. We draw the Blooming Marsh right on cue. It's the perfect land. We get to play our Scavenging Ooze. Life is fine. Nope. Lightning Axe into Bloodghast. Into land to get the Bloodghast back. Wow. So they mulligan to 5, and they kept 2 forms of interaction. I don't even necessarily know that Nature's Claim should be in against us. Lightning Axe obviously makes sense. And we got blown out so hard. Both of our forms of Grave Hate have been removed, and it's only turn 2, and we didn't get any real value out of them. And we could have prevented this. We could have prevented this with an Inquisition. So, I don't know if you can classify that as a misplay, but you can certainly classify it as a decision point that went horribly wrong. Now we're going to Inquisition, well after the fact, fully expecting to get punished. We get to take an Archamoeba. Sure. So we are just now in the same position we ended up in at the end of game 2, which is we have a lot of removal, but the removal is not very appealing without some way to take it out of the grave after we put it there. So we're just going to get hit for 2 with the Bloodghasts. Man, oh man, I feel pretty aggrieved by this whole state of affairs. Drawing a Field of Ruin, not doing much for us. They're going to crack that Bloodstained Mire. And they found a Cathartic Reunion, sure. Bunch of lands hit in the bin. They refill their hand. that Bloodghast hit the bin too. So I Fatal Push the Bloodghast here because, in my opinion, I basically need to draw removal, or some kind of graveyard hate here to win. If so, I want to give myself the best chance to hit their entire graveyard. And of course, I'm gaining life as well. That was basically a gain 4 life because I didn't take the 2 there, and I won't take the 2 next turn. Of course, I don't hit the graveyard stuff. I hit a Tireless Tracker. Pretty poor, but we'll take it. You know, it at least is a card that progresses my game plan in some generalized way. Life from the Loam, you know, at least they couldn't dredge the last turn, but now they get this Bloodghast value, and they get the Dredge card in the yard, so we're getting pretty far outvalued considering how potentially powerful our start was. And once again, we were just punished for not Inquisitioning. We could have taken either Nature's Claim, and then our Spellbomb would have been very good, or we could have taken Lightning Axe and taken over the game with Ooze. I think I would have taken Axe given the preponderance of removal in our hands, so definitely just feeling very, very punished by taking that line. Treetop Village was a fine draw because it lets us make a clue, it lets us have a potential threat, and hey, you know, Tarmogoyf is a thing. 5/6 Tarmogoyf is definitely a thing against their Bloodghast plan, which is all they really have for now. That said, they've got the Dredge card in the graveyard. They've got 5 cards in hand. Things are probably about to go down, but this could be pretty good. You know, they're only at 10 life too. That's the other thing. We've got lethal on board. They will dredge, and they dredge a Conflagrate and a couple of Stinkweed Imps. Doesn't get much better than that, folks. Really does not. That was a nice hit off that dredge. Alright, so they're going to pitch some other things. Amalgam and Bloodghast. They're going to take care of our Tireless Tracker with a Conflagrate. They get the Bloodghast back. They get the delay trigger on the Amalgam. And they get to cast a Golgari Thug. This guy is essentially just a chump blocker here. They attack and they pass. So we're going to fire up the Treetop Village, and here is why. So the first thing to do is look at this Golgari Thug and say, do we care if this dies? Because 2 things are relevant. Number 1, it has a death trigger, and number 2, it is a dredger. So let's address number 2 first. We do not care that they get another dredge effect in the yard because we are not slowly eating away at them with a Scavenging Ooze or anything like that, and they just have 3 other ones. So we don't care about giving them a dredge 4 when they have access to 2 dredge 5s. Do we care about the death trigger? No. That means they put a Narcomoeba on top and they get to dredge it back. You know, or they get to dredge something else back and mill the Narcomoeba and get it back. Sure, but again, there's no way we can really play around that. We have to race them. So these upsides from the Thug dying are acceptable in our view, and of course it's going to block the Tarmogoyf here, but there's nothing we can really do about that. We also don't have any better plays this turn than to just fire that up and attack. We're going to deploy our land, and we're going to pass. We're holding up Golgari Charm, which might actually be quite decent. We'll have to see what they do. So their Dredge, as we knew, is going to get them that free Narcomoeba. It's also going to hit us with a Creeping Chill. That's really bad when we're trying to race. So they're back up to 10, and their clock has also increased by 3. I went into this turn planning and hoping to do nothing. Just take a hit for 9. Attack again, hold up Golgari Charm again if I don't draw anything better, and then maybe be able to race them. But now that I'm at 11 thanks to that Creeping Chill, I am dead to a lot of things here. I'm dead to a lot of things to the point where I don't think I can put myself down to 2. I'm dead to just like a hard cast Creeping Chill out of their hand. So here I maybe should take the higher risk, higher reward play of just doing nothing and making them have something, but I still have a live draw off the top of my deck, right? So I still have an answer to the Narcomoeba. You know, if I... There are a lot of draws that are live off the top that could potentially be very good here. So playing around not being dead to a lot of things they can have this turn, I take the window for the Golgari Charm. I just clean up their entire board. Instead of taking 9 damage, I only take 2. And granted, they can get these Bloodghasts back at some point, maybe right now. But, yep, definitely just made sure I stayed alive that turn. Still needed something good off the top. Hardcast the Stinkweed Imp, sure. Field of Ruin's not going to do it. Field of Ruin's definitely not what we wanted to see. That said, we're going to go for it. We're going to get our Revolt trigger. Should have gotten a Forest there in retrospect just to have more mana for Ooze in the future, but yeah, nothing we can do here but get in for 5. We've got to leave the Treetop Village back to block here, because they have lethal on board. So we get in for 5, we'll pass. They're empty-handed, they're going to take a Dredge, they're going to mill over Stinky and a bunch of Cathartic Reunions and a Faithless Looting. They will flash back Faithless Looting instead of hardcasting the Stinkweed Imp. And they find Creeping Chill. Wow. So, maybe I'm missing something. It's a complicated state of affairs whenever you're against Dredge. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is it not the high-risk, high-reward line to loot there? Because then they cannot hardcast the Stinkweed Imp, and then they kind of have to leave Amalgam back and just attack with Bloodghast in order not to die to Tarmogoyf. They might be dead to a removal spell. I don't know, maybe I missed something, but that's pretty tilting if so, because they were in a commanding position. They took a little bit of an unnecessary risk, if I'm not incorrect, and they were really rewarded for it by hitting the Chill, which of course allows them to just push lethal even through our Treetop Village blocking this turn. We don't get another draw step. Man, oh man, oh man, this Game 3 just did not go our way. So, yep, Creeping Chill, Narcomoeba 2 for good measure, and then we just scoop. Yep, Game 3 just didn't go away, but the deck provided me with a victory, and I did not capitalize on it. If I hit Inquisition turn 1, we take away either the Nature's Claim or the Lightning Axe, probably the Lightning Axe, and then we get to take over the game with the Ooze. We also get to slow roll our Nile Spellbomb around the Nature's Claim to a point where it makes sense to play it, if they start looking like they're able to overwhelm the Scavenging Ooze activations. So, good news for pilots of this deck is that, as I've demonstrated, we can steal game 1s from Dredge, even though it's pretty heavily unfavored. We certainly have the tools to do so. Scavenging Ooze is our best shot at doing that. And we are fairly decent against the deck post side. I still think this is definitely one of the tougher matchups going in the format. And, if I had taken the different line turn 1 game 3, we would have this series wrapped up. Almost for sure. Now, that said, in defense of my play, I still think it was a reasonable line. The fact that they mulled to a 5 that had 2 pieces of interaction from the sideboard at all. I don't expect that they bring in very many copies of those types of cards. Maybe 3 or 4 total against us. So the fact that they mulled to 5 that had 2 of those pieces that happened to line up really well against our 2 pieces of Grave Hate. They needed both removal for a creature and removal for an artifact, and they had it. Man, the odds of that are quite low. I think the line was still correct, but again, I could be wrong. Maybe I am overstating the risk of playing a turn 1 Inquisition. Maybe if I do Inquisition something bad for me into the yard, I can just beat it anyway if I clear the path for Spellbomb and Skoos. I really don't know. That was a tough call. But the fact that they did mull to that hand that lined up so perfectly against not only what we had but what we did, and the fact that they so quickly drew into, you know, all of their normal Dredge stuff, yeah, have to say that we were pretty unlucky. But like I said, good news for pilots of Golgari. We can beat this deck. We really, truly can. Bad news for me, I failed to do so. So, I think this is the first loss I've put up on this channel out of, what, like 25, maybe, coming up on 25 matches with this deck specifically. No, I do not have a 90% win rate with Golgari. I'm definitely showing you more wins than losses relative to my own record. That said, my own win rate is quite nice with the deck, and I do think it's well positioned. But yeah, generally I'm looking to show good matches against tier 1 decks or spectacular matches against rogue decks. And generally those do end up with me winning, because if the game is a real game of Magic, if there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of interaction and a lot of interesting decision points, the Golgari 25-land Tireless Tracker deck is usually going to come out on top of those. That said, we took the L here, and I will have to think long and hard about what I did T1 and what I want to do in future situations that might end up being similar. So, tough beats, but a great game. It was still really fun, and we almost got there. We will just have to get them next time. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoy even the losses. Even the losses, we've got to still grin and bear them and learn what we can from them. And yeah, so let me know what you would have done in those comments, in the comments below in that situation, and let me know if you have any different sideboarding ideas for this matchup. Otherwise, have a great day, and I will see you for the next video. Thank you so much for watching.